This is Tenet. You're listening to part 2 of a 3-part series with Denver artist Stevon Lucero. And now, Tenet. So if you were in front of a classroom of emerging artists in college or high school or whatever, what advice would you give them that to help them on their way?
You know, that reminds me of an incident. Once I was doing a show and this young man came in. I forget his name. This young man came in and he was looking at my art and he was asking me questions and this and that. And then he stopped and he says, I want to ask you a question. He says, but you got to promise me, you got to tell me the truth. And I said, what do you mean? I've been telling you the truth on all the questions you were even asking, so I haven't lied to you yet, so go ahead, ask. And he says, if I wanted to be an artist, what advice would you give me what would you tell me that I have to do to prepare myself to be an artist? I said, well, the first thing you got to do is you got to ask yourself, what kind of artist do you want to be? You know, if you want to paint pretty pictures and you want to make a lot of money and you want to, you know, attract women and become famous and do these things, then, well, paint pretty pictures. Paint what the audience wants you to paint. Paint what it is people want to hear or see. But if you want the truth, if you want to paint what you feel, who you are, what you want, then you got to be ready to pay the price. You got to be able to know. You got to know that they're gonna beat you for it. They're gonna take chunks out of you for it. They're gonna make you pay a price because they don't want the truth. They don't want to hear about you. They don't want to hear about the things that you want to say to them. You know, and if you're willing to pay that price, if you're willing to do that, then you have to stop and look inside and say, well, then who am I? And what is it that I want to do? I says, and then do it. But no, it's not going to be easy. It's going to be painful. And don't let people give you the raw talk. It's not. You pay a high price for the truth. And if you're willing to pay it, then you're halfway there. You have to be strong. And he just looked at me and he said, thank you. And he turned around and he walked out. And so I continued, and there was a lot of people that night. And about 15 minutes, 20 minutes later, somebody came in and says, wow, there's a kid outside sitting out there on that bench and he's crying. And, I failed to mention this kid, before he asked me that question, he started to tell me about himself. And he said that he'd been living on the streets now for 5 years or something like that. And he showed me how he had tried to commit suicide, and he showed me his arms, and he had these huge, ugly scars running up the length of his forearms on both of them, where he tried to commit suicide several times. And he didn't do the little this way. He went this way, all the way up. And the scars were huge and bulged. And he said he had been a junkie. He had been addicted to heroin. So this kid had been suffering for a long time. And somebody came in and said, there's a kid sitting out on the bench. And he's crying. He's weeping. And he's telling everybody that for his whole life, he wanted somebody to tell him the truth. And he says, and there's a man in there who spoke the truth. And he says, and he was pointing at you, or pointing, towards your space there. And he says, was that you? And I said, and I was freaked. I didn't know what to say. I was really moved. But that is the same thing I've told a lot of young people, because all of them that come to me, they're all at that stage where they're trying to define themselves. They're going through their teenage angst. They want to break that umbilical cord. They want to tell mom and dad to go to hell. They're like the 60s generation where we grew up and said, there ain't no Santa Claus. You mean the 50s are all bullshit? It's all a lie. And you want me to go to Vietnam and die? And that's essentially the same story all young people are doing. That's why rock and roll has that rebellious attitude about it. It's that coming of age angst that everybody goes through, especially in this country. And I tell them, I says, you're looking for your individuality. You're looking for your truth, and you think that you can find it through your art. But you got to understand something. That, if you're dressing in punk and you're painting your face and you're wearing tattoos and you got rings in your nose and stuff and all this stuff, everything you're doing, everything you're saying, everything you're, going to say has already been said, done before by somebody else, and probably a lot better. You're not, there's not a single original thing about you, except that when you create something, when you sit down and you write something, you paint something, you do something that is a creative act. When you get done and you sit back and you look at that and you say, oh God, where did that come from? Wow. And you surprise yourself. No, right there in that moment, at that second, you are unique in the universe. Right then, and only then are you original. You are unique. You are the only one, because that belongs to you. And if that's what you want to do, and that's what you want to get to as an artist, then you're on your way. If you can understand that and you're willing to pay the price for it and go through the work. That's the other thing I tell them. Everybody in America wants to be a star. Everybody wants to be Johnny Depp or whatever. There's always somebody they look up to, somebody they make their hero. Everybody has desire, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't have the will. And you got to have the will to do it, which means you got to do the work. You got to stop. And if you're partying with your friends, you got to leave the party and go home and do your work. You've got to stop yourself and discipline yourself and say, what is it I want to do? Do I want to sit here and play with my genitalia, or do I want to find out the reason why I have this urge to begin with? And it's funny because kids will get it. I had one situation where I was doing a show and I had this piece up. And about this group of kids came in, and they were some real scary looking kids. They had the spiked hair up, the mohawk haircuts with the spikes up there, and they were wearing black leather with chains hanging off of them, and painted faces and tattoos all over themselves, and carrying little knives in their jeans and their motorcycle boots and the whole bit. And they come in, and I remember the gal who was watching. Who was curating the show. I was one of the artists in the show, and I was sitting in the gallery that day, and they came in. She's like, oh God, she got all scared because it was late in the evening, and she was like, there was nobody else there, and she's getting like these fear flashes. She comes in, and they're being all rowdy and making noise and wandering around looking at the art. And then they walked up to this one, and I had a couple other pieces there as well, and they stopped and they started commenting on it. So I walked over and I said, "Are you interested in that?" And they said, "Well, yeah, it's pretty cool. What is it, man?" And so I began to explain the piece to him. I told him that the three feathers represented the Trinity of consciousness. It's red, yellow, blue, which is everything you see. And I started to give him a whole lecture on Trinities. And then I went from there, and I went down through all the symbology. I talked about the mask of personality. I talked about how the intellect was just a construct, and I showed how, like, he's standing on two legs. One leg is infinity, there's Trinity, the mystery of faith and belief. I said the other mask is the fool, which is the preoccupation with the material world. The mountain was God. The staff represented the generative principle of the universe. The ring in the heart, the rose represented the feminine principle, the act of love. And I went through the whole bit. And by the time I was done, they were like, wow, that's so cool. It's like they completely changed. They became like little children, as opposed to these,
ruffians,
these demons from hell, and they started asking questions about the other pieces and stuff. And I ended up giving them an entire lecture on spirituality and biblical means. I mean, no matter where I went, they were
engaged.
They were accepting it. They were like thinking about it. And then they thanked me politely and they left. And the gal, Christine, comes out from the back and she goes, and she was the Attorney General's secretary or something like that, or assistant. And she had coordinated this show. And she said, "How did you do that?" Because she's involved in law and she deals with people like that all the time. And she said, "How did you do that? How did you do that?" And I said, "Do what?" And she said, "You completely transformed those kids." He said, "I was terrified when they came in." He said, "But you had them in the palm of your hand." And I said, "Well, I didn't intend to. I just told them the truth."
That's it. You spoke the truth.
And she freaked. She's like, "Wow, I said, that's all you have to do. And that's pretty much it, you know. And at the same time, you do too much of that and people will buy your art, you know?
Right.
So,
but all art should be the expression of truth, right?
yeah. And real veteran artists will do that. Yeah. Some will get a little arrogant about it.
Sure.
You know, they get like a little rowdy about it. It's the truth. Leave me alone. You know, I don't want to talk to you about it, you peasant.
If you can't understand it, then I'm not going to explain it to you.
Yeah. And I've been more patient than that.
Don't you feel you have an obligation?
You know, because of the divisions and stuff I was explaining earlier about, okay, that one that I had, that first one that I talked about, this stuff continued to this day. Stuff's going on with me that I just don't talk about it anymore. Because every time something would happen, I go running around and tell her, hey, you know what happened to me? I didn't realize at the time how annoying that was, you know. In the course of all the years that this has been going on with me, my internal dialogue is such that the struggle I have now is to shut up. Because what I think and what I feel and what I want to express is fine when people respond to it for what it is, but I don't want the flattery later. I feel like if it ends up giving me any kind of vainglory or, you know, recognition or that sort of thing, I don't want it because I feel it violates everything that I'm saying, you know?
It somehow invalidates that.
Yeah, and I don't want to step into that. I don't want to become that.
But you're conscious of it.
But I'm
so I think
conscious of it.
I think that you being conscious of it helps validate all of that.
Well, it helps me to temper it when I do it.
Right. And this is the reason I enjoy talking with you, and I enjoyed those days when I was over here hanging out with you. You're very humble. Like I know
I thought you're arrogant.
I know you're human like the rest of us and go through those same emotions. There's certain people that I just gravitate towards, and you being who you are and being humble, that's what I love about you. And the fact that you have all this wisdom that you're willing to share with people, I was appreciative of that. It wasn't about what I was doing here. It wasn't about photographing artwork. It was more the fact that I got to hang out with you for 2 days or whatever it was that I was over here. You know, I was educated and I learned something, and I appreciate that in a fellow artist or human being. You know,
Did I ever tell you when you were here before, did I tell you about the reoccurring dreams that I had from the ages of 13 to 17?
You know, refresh my memory because I'm not sure that I remember that.
This sort of encapsulates why I do talk about this to people. When I was 13, I started to have these dreams, and I would have them maybe 3 or 4 times a year. And I had them from the ages of 13 to 17. And I would wait for these dreams. I mean, I would go to bed at night hoping I'd have one of these dreams because when I got done with them, they were so incredible. And each time it was different. It was like, it's a different dream, but it's the same dream. The details would be different, but the pattern was the same. Like I was talking about patterns. And the pattern was this. I'd have a dream where I'm walking along down the street or at home or whatever, but a UFO would come by. And I think the UFO was a symbol not of UFOs. I'm not, because people used to say, oh, you were an abductee. And no, it has nothing to do with that. What it is it's my subconscious mind saying, this comes from the outside. This isn't coming from you. Because all of our dreams come from you. It's your own subconscious. But this is saying, no, this isn't coming from you. This is out there. And a UFO would come along and it would zap me. A beam of light would come down and it would hit me, and all of a sudden I'd be picked up, and sometimes I'd be floating in the air like a sun dancer with being pierced, and I'd be holding and I'd be dangling. And there was that one picture of that movie, those guys that were abducted. It was just like that one scene they used in that poster for that. And sometimes the light would carry me into the spaceship, and then it would take off, and then they would come back later and it would just dump me off. Or it was always some sort of UFO thing. I never saw who was in the UFO, and each time was different. Sometimes it would just hit me with this beam of light, and I would be left as a heap on the sidewalk, or it would take me away and then bring me back. Or sometimes it would pick me up and put me someplace else, or just, it was always that. And then anyway, I'd be in a heap on the ground. All my hair would be burned off. My clothes would be burned. My eyebrows would be burned off. And people would come and they would say, oh, get into the hospital. And they would take me to the hospital. And in the hospital, I would be in a coma. I would be in a hospital bed. And while I was in the hospital, there was always this woman, this little old lady. I never saw her face. She was always bent over. And she was like an archetypical old mystery woman, a no-Mexican woman with bent over, and you couldn't see her face because she was wearing a kind of a cowl, and she'd be at the foot of my bed like she was praying or something. And I would be in a coma, and my family would come and visitors would come, and I would be in a coma for at least a year. I'd be there in the hospital in the coma for a year. While I was in the coma, I went to another world. And in this other world, I was standing there. It always starts the same. I'd be standing there talking to a group of people, and we were wearing long white robes. And all of a sudden, you would hear these trumpets. Do-do-do-do-do-do. When the trumpets would blow, everybody would stop what they were doing. They'd put their hands like this, and they would look down. The master would walk by. He just emitted light. You couldn't see him. It was just this kind of ball of light. But you could see a human form within it, kind of walking along. And you couldn't look at him. He was so bright. He was so intense. You couldn't look at him. You'd look away. But when he'd get close to you, you would feel this ecstasy, this joy. You would just go, it was like a big orgasm or something. You would just, and he came walking by, and all of a sudden he stopped, and he called me. And I turned and I kept going, no, he can't be talking to me. He can't be talking to me. I'm nothing. I'm the stupidest person here. And he said, walk with me. And you couldn't disobey him. So I went over and I wouldn't look at him. I kept looking away. But the closer I got to him, I mean, it was almost impossible to contain myself. I was feeling so much joy. And he started talking to me quietly. And he started to tell me about why he created everything and why everything was and where it was going and what was going to happen. And he told me what my life was. He told me he was going to send me to the world. He told me all this stuff. And we walked during the time I was in the coma, he walked with me that whole time. And he told me all this stuff. And he says, and then at the end of it, he stopped and he says, it's time for you to go back. And he says, it's time for you to go back into the dream. He said, but you're going to forget everything I've just told you. But as long as you hold me in your heart, you'll know what to do and when to do it and what to say and when to say it. And then he told me to leave. And I walked away. The next thing I knew, I was waking up from my coma. Now, while I was in my coma, my hair would have grown back. It was always white. And in each dream, from the time I woke from the coma, it was different. Like in some comas, I woke up and I became a wandering minstrel. I had a guitar. I dressed in white. I was always barefoot. And I would walk around and I would sing songs to people. Or in one dream, the one I remember most vividly is the one where I got up and I became a musician, but I put out albums that were the red, yellow, and blue album, and then the orange, purple, and green album, and then the white album and the black album. And each album conveyed the theme of the color. And within the theme of the color was the realities that color produced in the world, which later I learned in Kabbalism and the creation. It's the idea that there was first the white light, and the light was broken into colors, and the light formed into matter by vibrating into different frequencies, which is what matter is. I made these albums, and the albums sold. They made all kinds of money, but I never kept the money. What I did is I would finance art. I would finance people to open galleries, artists to build their careers, musicians to do the things they had to do. For anything that was created, people would come to me and I would finance their art. And there was one common denominator in all of the dreams, regardless of what I did in my life after I woke from that. There was one common element, and that is like if I was singing, I'd walk up to you and I would look at you and I'd look at you, and then I would sing you a song, and the song would reveal your soul. It would tell you who you were, and then I would leave you. And at the end of it, you would have to decide, is there a God or not? You make the choice. In other words, a lot of people don't have the ability to make a choice about faith because they don't even believe they have a soul. They don't believe in the basic fundamental element. Because all cultures say there's a soul, there's other thing, there's this thing called spirit. But nobody, and science is and everything it can to eradicate that idea. And that was what I did, is that no matter what I did, and through my art, through these albums, whatever, people would find their souls. And once they found their soul, then they could make a decision. And then they could figure out what God's will was for them and then proceed to live their lives. And that was it. I didn't tell them what they were to do or how they were to do it. They already knew. I just had to reveal to them the source that allows them to do it. In other words, I was flipping their button. That was my only purpose. And at the end of every dream, it was ended with me walking by a beach by the side of the ocean, with the waves coming up. And as the waves would come up around my feet, where the waves would curl, you would see art pop up, galleries, artists, musicians, writers, poets, everything. See, that's when I came to Denver. I thought I was going to become a successful artist and that I was going to use my money to instigate the growth of art. That my purpose was to be a catalyst for art because God was going to use art to bring about the third revelation, the revelation of the Holy Spirit through the creative act. And when I would wake from these dreams, I would feel great for days. And the thing that I remember most about these dreams is that when I was walking with the Master, I can still feel it when I think about it.
That feeling of elation.
That feeling of elation. It's like an ecstasy, a joy, so powerful. It's like you feel like you're going to explode. So immense. And yet at the same time, it's total calm, total peace there. And I've been having experiences. I've been putting them on the website. I got 8 of them down now on the website, including this one. So that's why I talk about these things. Because when he said, you'll know what to say and when to say it, what to do and when to do it. And that's how I've lived my life since I was 20 years old. When I was at Columbia University, I did my show at Columbia University. These kids came up and they said, are you ready for your lecture? And I didn't know I was supposed to give a lecture. And they had this big auditorium. There was like 225 kids in there. And I went, oh, shit. I said, lecture? I didn't know I was going to do that. And they said, well, don't you have it? We need it. We need a copy of your speech because we have to record it. And I said, well, no, I don't. And they said, well, do you know what you're going to talk about? And I says, no, I don't. And so what are you going to do? And I don't know. So, well, what are you going to say? And I said, I don't know. I'll make it up as I go along. That's what I do. I don't pre-think anything. And when I do, it goes out to hell. It turns to mud. So when I find myself in a circumstance where all of a sudden somebody says, oh, what are you doing? And I find myself giving these lectures and I don't intend it. I'm not looking for it. And then after I get done, they'll come over and they'll give me a big hug and everything. And I'm embarrassed. I'm ashamed. I get I don't know what to do because then I feel like I've just committed a big sin, because I want to tell them, no. It's not me. Then if you start saying things like, oh, it's the spirit, it's God, it's this, it's that, then people look at you and they go, oh man, this guy's wacko, So when I was married to my first wife, Nancy, one morning she got up, she says, I had a weird dream about you last night. And I said, oh? She said, yeah, it was kind of strange. She said, you're going to become famous. And I said, yeah, sure. And she says, no. She says, but you're not going to know it. She says, people are going to walk up to you and say, they want your autograph. And you're going to look at them like, what do you want my autograph for? You will not be aware of it. And that every time anybody does anything or says anything to you, you're going to just forget about it and disregard it because you just won't believe it. And you're going to be like that all the time. One day I realized that that's exactly what's happened. I've been places where all of a sudden, people are treating me like a celebrity and stuff like that. And I look at them like, what the hell's wrong with you? I don't get it. And when I leave a place, even if I've gone to a show and I've gotten a lot of flattery and a lot of attention, when I get home, it's like it never happened. It's like, oh man, they didn't even know I was there. And it's kind of a defense mechanism for me. It's a way I keep myself
in check.
Yeah. At this particular stage, I don't know. They asked me to go and do a talk over at the Denver Art Museum on the 27th. And it was mostly through Molina because I did this stuff with him. And I wanted to say, no, don't want to do it. So it's like I said, and even Randy says, no, you have to do these things because whatever it is you have to say, people have to hear. So the only thing I do is I go without any intention.
And it reveals itself.
Yeah, that's it. And, and I think, and that's the thing that, like I said, that I try to convey to young people and to other artists. this is where art's going to go. And you see in a lot of artists talking this way now, not as overtly spiritual like I am, like I'm speaking, but you see them playing with the concepts and the ideas, and stuff that people would look at me before and just disregard me. In '98, Victor was my agent at that time. They put out this like little newsletter, and they wanted me to write articles. And I wrote, when I went around here someplace, I wrote an article about, what the Spaniards were to the Aztecs is what UFOs are to us. And I went into a little lecture about art and different things. I was talking about the implication of that with all of this alien, ancient aliens talk and all of this new technological pseudo religions that are emerging now the aliens put us here. Everybody's into this aliens thing. It's the answer to everything now. Well, they're the ones that gave us the computers. I wrote that article, and I thought what I said was kind of clever. And they distributed it, and they went out, and then a couple years ago, before he died, Hawkins came out with that statement about if the aliens ever come here, it'll be like when the Spaniards came to the Aztecs. And everybody went, "Whoa! It's radical. This is radical." Hawkins said this, and it's brilliant. And I was sitting there thinking, yeah, man, nobody cared when I said it.
He read your article.
Yeah, who read the article? So it goes back to that. So
do you buy into the whole starving artist, the ideal of the starving artist?
No,
buy into that?
I don't know. I think that society has created these little
stereotypes.
Yeah, stereotypes and stuff. It's like with everything else.
Some of these bad traditions that help alienate.
No artist wants to be the starving artist.
No,
I remember first time I did a TV interview, it was with that, she was a Chicana, had a TV show on Channel 2 or something like that. And she was interviewing me and somebody else. But anyway, the first thing she says to me, looked at me, she said, "Well, so much for the starving artist." And I wasn't as fat as I am now. So no, I don't buy into that. But I do understand something. And I think that kind of goes with all of this. But it's something more applicable to artists, but I think it's to the whole human condition. And that is the idea of suffering. Everybody suffers. Everybody faces something that causes them pain. It can be dramatic. It can be somebody didn't get the right colored car for Christmas, or it's a relative thing, It goes with the human condition. And then you have the people who rationalize that, well, you can't have joy without having pain, I think it's more than that. I think that suffering is part of a tempering process of the spirit. It's part of that stripping away of the unimportant things. If you take it personal, if you say, well, why me? Why did I have to go through this? Why did this happen to me? When you turn it all into yourself, then it turns into hell. Then it turns into something.
It's harmful.
That's harmful. That's destructive. And destructive more for you,
right,
than whatever you're pointing a finger at. And there's a point there where you can take that, and it doesn't mean that the suffering goes away. I just read a book recently called The Mystery of Suffering, and Arlette says, "What in the hell are you reading?" And the whole premise of the book was saying, look, it's not something you want to celebrate, but it's not something that you want to be terrified of. It just goes with the territory. Because when it's over, it's gone. There's no more suffering. There's something there that you're learning. And the sooner you learn it, the easier that suffering is going to be. It doesn't mean it'll go away. All of the saints had some sort of weird disease or something that was killing them while they're sitting there having their religious ecstasies. I mean, look at Van Gogh. The guy suffered horribly. And yet, he climbed such ecstatic levels through his art. I mean, he saw and felt and did things that had made him immortal in the eyes of society, And he knew it when he was going through it, but he didn't pinpoint it like that with that kind of value. It was just happening to him, that was reality. And that's the nature of suffering. It's the reality. But it's like that movie I was talking about earlier, La Strada, because in the end of that, it's about a man who buys this retarded woman. I should use the word retarded since that's a no-no now, but an intellectually challenged character. But she plays this thing, and she is sold to this wandering strongman who wanders around on his three-wheeled motorcycle, and he puts on shows of his strength, and he breaks the and he's a brute. And he meets a man who wears wings, and he's a tightrope walker, and he's a symbol of Christ. The Anthony Quinn character is a symbol of mankind, and she's a symbol of innocence that all humans have. In the course of the story, the brute kills the tightrope walker accidentally, but he kills him just the same. And she can't live with the guilt, and so he dumps her on the road, disappears, leaves her. And then he goes back to that village one day, and he discovers, and he hears a woman singing the song the woman used to sing. And he says, "Where did you hear that tune?" She says, "Oh, it was this woman who was left beside the road." And she said, well, she was so sweet, but then she was so sad. And he said, "What happened to her?" He said, "Well, she died. She died." And he said, "Well, of what?" And she said, "They say she died of a broken heart." So that night he goes out and he's feeling guilty because he knows what he did. He goes out, he gets drunk, he gets into a fight. And then the last scene, he's wandering through a beach. He's all alone, he's drunk, and he falls in the sand, and he looks up and he sees the stars. All of a sudden you realize he's the most alone man in the world. He is what we all are. We come into the world alone. We are alone. And it's through love that we find our substance, that thing that makes us alive. And he had lost it all. He destroyed it for no reason. And he realizes it. That whole burden, that whole weight of the universe comes upon him. And he just looks and he goes to scream and he can't. All he can do is clutch the sand in pain. And the camera moves away. That's the human condition. That's the suffering. He was at his learning moment right then. At that moment, he became human. He became himself. He became real. And he paid a price for it. That's what pain does. And none of us escapes it. It all manifests in some form or fashion in some way somewhere down the road. And you embrace it. You accept it.
Love is a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We all desire it, but think about how many times we wreck that thing.
And that's that thing I was talking about, love. That love mixes with that human condition, that human element, that human failing, and it breaks our hearts. And we all suffer for it. But in that suffering, we can become something else. We do become something else. We learn the meaning of this, even as painful as it is. And that makes us human, makes us more human. What greater objective is there in life? That's what we're here to learn who we are. And that's, to me, that's what art does. That's the power of art. And that's why I see the real revolution in the future will be through the creative acts of people that no longer see art as merely entertainment, but as a necessary function of life.
To change.
Yeah.
To evolve.
Yeah. A vehicle. A new kind of church.
Let me ask you this. Where do you see technology in all of this?
Technology is a tool.
Do you think it's a natural evolution? Will we integrate with the technology at some point?
At some point we will have to, but not until we get certain notions out of our head. You have your choice. If you choose to believe and have faith in something greater than yourself, the objective is possible life after death. We don't know, but that's what faith is. It's the belief in something impossible can happen. And so you're opening the door for that. But technology says, oh, there is no door to open. All there is death. When you're dead, you're dead. So what is technology's promise of immortality? Because that is the single number one preoccupation in human existence. Two things. One is the aloneness that we're all born into. And the second is that we all die. Everything dies. Nobody gets out of here alive, like Jim Morrison said. So and that's why we do what we do. That's why we build civilization. That's why we build religions. That's why we build systems to sustain survival, to sustain this thing of trying till we figure out how do we get out of this game and still stay alive. And the closest thing we come to it is religion, faith. Science comes along and all pissed off because of what they did to Galileo out of revenge. They've waged a war on belief systems. But yet, look at the whole, like the Big Bang Theory, which replaced the idea of in the beginning was the word. If you look at that idea for what it is, it's just as bizarre and just as weird as the old man in the sky. Okay, if it was all a Big Bang, One, what was that little ball that blew up? Two, what was that little ball floating in? Because space and time were created in the Big Bang, in the ball. So it was floating in something. But we can't say something because that supersedes the whole idea of the universe, because something only comes out of matter. And matter was that ball. And then it blew up. What made it blow up? And what was that matter? Where did that matter come from? So you always go back to that fundamental mystery that at some point you're making a leap of faith anyway. Whether you believe it's some old man in the sky or whether you believe it's a Big Bang. You know, it's the same thing. Besides, the Big Bang Theory was created by a Catholic monk. But then what does technology promise in replacement of what I call the life proposition? There's two propositions. One says there's life after death. The other proposition says, no, there isn't. The answer to that technology's proposition is death. When you're dead, you're dead. That's it. You're done. There's nothing else. So what did they promise? Do you know what the answer is? The Borg. The only key to immortality, the best answer that science can give you is, well, we'll turn everybody into Borg. We'll create artificial intelligence. So we'll take away our natural inclination to think, and we'll turn ourselves into cyborgs, and we will become the Borg. Because that's the promise of technology. And at some point, there's an awakening that takes place. Now, goes back to another thing, going back to your question. In the old medieval concepts of alchemy, the alchemists, all science comes out of alchemy. All of the original scientists were the alchemists. They're the ones who were figuring chemicals out and elements and all that stuff. They were doing all of that. And what were they? I mean, Newton was a freaking alchemist. He would go down his basement, put on his little robe, and he was trying to be Merlin. And there's that mythology that scientists use too. They have it's a religion. It's some religion of matter. When these guys were trying to find their way into discovering matter, there was this study called alchemy that was really big during the medieval period. And he goes, oh, well, what were they doing? They were trying to find the Philosopher's Stone, which turns lead into gold. No, that isn't what they were doing. That's just the mythology. The reality is that the objective of alchemists was to find out how to find immortality. They were trying to find a chemical basis by which we could return to make extended life. And they came up with something very similar to what I'm talking about in art, and the things that I described is very similar to that in alchemy. Now, the alchemists had a 4-step basic plan to their view of the world. So there's 4 different steps you go through to get to that ultimate thing of the transformation of being into immortality. But the first one, the very first rule, and if you don't get this rule, then you might as well forget the other 3. You're not going to get there. The first rule is that the world is asleep. Now, this goes back to this question which you're asking about the integration of technology. The world is asleep. And the symbol they used, they had a picture they used. And what it was a man laying in a grave, a hole dug in the ground. He's asleep. And while he's sleeping, there's a serpent or a dragon-like, serpent-like creature with his body is coiled around his body. And he's asleep. And he's dreaming. He's dreaming the world. And everything we have in the world is a byproduct of that dream. The first rule in alchemy is to wake up. You can't go through any of the processes without waking up. That's an initiation. That's what picking up your cross is, waking up. Okay? Now, when I was looking at that image, and I was thinking, there's something familiar about that. I've seen that someplace else before. Where have I seen that? And then I looked down and I saw this and I thought, there it is. There's the man sleeping in his grave. He's in this maze. That's the grave. He's asleep. And here's the serpent coiled around him, trying to entrap him, trying to hold him within the dream. And he's trying to cut his way out of it. But he's only dreaming he's awake. And the poem that this is attached to is called The Sleeper's Dilemma. And that's the name of the painting, Sleeper's Dilemma. It's the idea that everybody's asleep. And in that sleep, we created dreams. And in those dreams, we built civilization. We invented this and we invented that. And we created everything that we know and everything that we see. The sleeper's dilemma is that if he chooses to wake, then he can't dream anymore. He's now responsible for what reality is. He has to make a new reality.
He's accountable.
Exactly. And that's the sleeper's dilemma. Do you want to wake up and become accountable? Which means that everything that you know, you've got to recreate. Or you stay asleep and just keep on flowing with what it is. And that's what the alchemists were pointing out, that the world is asleep and everybody's asleep. And the powers that be do everything they can to keep people asleep. Everything is designed that way, to keep people asleep. So when you said to me, well, is it integratable? If we don't wake up, the best technology is going to give us is eventual total and complete absolute is slavery, to the point where the peasants can't rise up and overthrow the lords of the world. Okay? The only resolution is that people have to wake up. Everybody has to wake up and move the path. And when that happens, then the technology becomes dominated by human thinking and not by the powers that be. Because technology is only a tool. It's neither good nor evil.
It's what you do with it.
It's what you do with it. And if we do the right thing, we could feed the world. We could bring peace. We could clean it up. We could clean up the planet. We can figure out the problems. But the reason we can't figure out the problems is a sleeper cannot go into certain areas of thought because he's not responsible. Everybody shrugs it off, so they buy into the lie. So the lie perpetuates itself over and over and over again. And that's what I look at as art. Art puts ideas into the culture that allows a slow process of awakening. The artists have been slowly planting little seeds here and there and here and there and here and there. And now you're seeing more and more young people, because of the internet, if they get off their narcissist trip, if they put down their technological intoxication with the cell phone and start waking up, if that process can start waking them up, eventually technology will start becoming the tool that it was meant to be, because there's nothing inherently evil about it. It's the evil comes from the men who manipulate it. And that's the thing about artists, is that the people who are creative inevitably come to truth. That's what I said, inevitably, no matter what your initial motivations are, after you've done it for 30, 40 years, all of a sudden you're going, I'm into the art, man. And that art is themselves. It's that growth. And everybody starts moving towards what we would call the will of God. What the will of God is benevolent. It's not some sort of egocentric deity that wants us all to, see hallelujahs all the time. God lives through us, in us, and he wants us to have a good time. That's why we're all individuals. We're not replications. He doesn't want clones. He doesn't want weak people. He wants people who celebrate and know and express their joy of life.
This gift that we've been given.
What?
This gift that we've been given.
Yes. To recognize that, you know what? The greatest magic in the world is life itself. Quit killing each other, Quit killing the planet. You talk about photography. There's these collections of old photographs that are made from the 1860s, 1840s, from when they first started doing what are they called, daguerreotypes?
Daguerreotypes.
Yeah, daguerreotypes. That up to the present, and you see some films, and you watch these things, and I watch some of these old films that were made like in 1896 and 1903, and you see all the life. You say, well, look at all those guys. They're all wearing straw hats, every one of them. Or they're all wearing bowlers, or the women are all dressed this way. And you see this kind of undulation of all this life and the children playing and this and that. And then you stop and you think, and they're all dead. And yet every single one of them lived an individual life, had individual things that happened to them. They went through everything. And then they showed this one shot where this guy had taken some film footage of these new buildings they had built in New York about 1906, right around the time that they were first building a lot of really big bridges and stuff. And I was looking at it, and it was real pristine. All of a sudden, you're seeing all these shots of the New York urban landscape, but they're pristine. They're new. The buildings are new. There's a cleanness. And I'm looking at it, and I said, there's something familiar about that. And then all of a sudden, I flashed looking at a photograph or a scene of a valley. And you're looking at this pristine scene and you're going, it's beautiful. And then you realize that everywhere you look in nature is beautiful. And then I compared that to the scene in New York, and I thought, that's beautiful too. Because in the New York scene, you're looking at that scene and I'm imagining all the life in it and all these things and what people did to create resolutions to problems of population and how they're getting water to people and food to people. And you realize there's people being murdered and there's people being raped and there's people making love and there's people raising their children and there's men fighting with their wives and all of these different things that are just going on, just bundle of life, and it's all contained within that urban scene. And then you look at the nature scene, and you realize the same stuff's going on there. The mountain lion is chasing the deer, and the bee is fighting with the wasp, and the spider is catching a fly in his web, and the fish is being caught by a bear over here, and the bees are flying into the flower. All of this stuff, all of this activity, all of this, that life just permeates everything. Everywhere, whether it's technological and urban or whether it's nature, it's the same thing. And you stop and you realize that you can't just identify life as being one thing or another. It's everything. And that's when you stop and you say it's all sacred. It's all the radiance. And then there are these men, these people, particularly men, who see everything in terms of wealth, power, greed. They don't live in the real world. They don't see that radiance. They don't see that beauty. Those are the people that the artists are waging war against. Tony used to say all the time, the Creator watches the world through the eyes of the children. So let's make the world beautiful for the children so the Creator will be pleased. And that's it. That's what we do. We define the soul of humanity. But humanity has to listen. And that's why our real job is to wake it up. To wake it up so it can become what it's supposed to become. You know, I got into this idea. I was looking at the idea of religions and histories. Why are the Judeo-Christian religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam structured this way? And then we look at Hinduism and then we look at the Eastern religions are structured another way. And I came to the realization that they represent two different factions. One is of the subconscious and one is of the conscious. The Hindu religions, the Indian religions, Buddhist, the Taoism, Shintoism, all these different things, these are cultures that never left the garden. I'm speaking metaphorically here. They never left the garden. The religions we grow up in, the Judeo-Christian religions, they all deal with the garden. And what is the garden? The garden is where humanity became conscious. That's when we went from unconsciousness to conscious. Just like when a child is born, a child's unconscious. Doesn't even have convolutions in his brain. As he goes through and he learns things, convolutions develop. By the age of 3, he starts to develop memory, continuity of being, and he starts to become a person, starts to develop. These religions are the religions of where man becomes sentient. Not that these other people aren't sentient. It's that he becomes sentient on a cultural tree of life level, on a planetary level. It's called a planetary consciousness. That the planet itself is a conscious and an unconscious. Okay? So the processes of the Judeo-Christian traditions, Christianity is the religion of the Son, Jews are the religion of the Father, and Islam is the religion of the Spirit, because it's a nation. But they're all religions of those which emerged from the garden. They went from becoming self-aware. That's what the eating of the apple was symbolic of. That in doing that, they became aware of the duality, which is the basic principle of the breakdown of the material aspects of life, of existence. And then begins a process. It begins a process of learning what the world is. And we go through this whole thing and start to build civilization, start to go all these things. And then we reach a point where this thing says, oh, look, the concept is the inner life, the inner consciousness. Because before that, man was had a beehive consciousness. That's why things got done. That's why they were able to build pyramids. That's why pharaohs and stuff like that were able to control people, because there was no individuality in the sake of individuality. Now, we project that into the past, but that didn't exist. They didn't see the world, like I said, the same way. But after the advent of the garden, of that idea, the evolution of individuality starts to manifest. It starts to move through time and space. Then you come along with Christ, which is the birth. What is Christ? He is the manifestation of the Spirit and flesh. He's the Word made flesh. He's also a metaphor of that spirit manifesting in humanity as part of the tree. That was what symbolized with Moses in the cave when he saw the tree of life on fire. It didn't burn. He didn't see a tree of life. He saw a burning bush. Well, this burning bush was a young tree. It was a new tree. It was a covenant with the planet, with the whole of humanity. And it was burning because the fire represents transformation. It was the beginning of a transformational process that was taking place on the planet. And then the manifestation of that was this shadow figure that was to emerge. And that's where this idea of this becomes this. When that happened, the shift of consciousness, individuality became internalized. The kingdom is within. And so we have the beginning of history, which went to the West, went into the Western, what we call the Western civilization. Now, if you look at individual lives, the first 3 years are virtually, do you remember your first 3 years of your life?
Not really. I mean,
yeah, it's
little things, but yeah,
blank.
it's a pretty blank canvas.
What happened in the first 300 years from in terms of our BC break there? We use BC as our pivotal point. For 300 years, you had a clandestine Christianity. It was underground. It was all secretive. The Greeks accepted it because the Greeks had been intellectually creating the intellectual structures to comprehend the abstract qualities of what was being introduced here in terms of that individuality. They had already set the intellectual foundation, and they're the ones who spread the religion. And then Constantine comes along and says, okay, you're now conscious. What happens around 3 or 4? You start to develop your being. You've learned to walk. You have that fundamental relationship with the mother. And the first thing you do is you're concerned with real egoistic type of little things, because you're getting doted upon by your parents. And that's what happened in the beginning of the church. It became all flamboyant. It became all this and that. And it started immediately going through its corruptions from the ages of from the 4th century, the 5th century, 6th century. 6th century was collapse of Rome. What happens around the age of 6? You pretty much have an identity. You pretty much are, I'm a kid. I know who I am. You get this, you start to develop those rudimentary, fundamental ego propositions of yourself. Up until then, you're just a little kid. Now I'm a big kid now. And then you start from there to puberty. And then what happens at 13? You go through puberty. You discover your genitalia. Your hormones kick in. What happened in the 13th century? The Gutenberg press came in, and the dissemination of information started to spread. And step by step, you see the same things that happens to an individual in their growth, the same thing happened in those centuries to Western civilization. Until you get into 18, you consider yourself an adult. You're not quite adult, but you're an adult. What happens in the Industrial Revolution? And in all of the other revolutions, the Age of Enlightenment, all of a sudden, well, I'm an adult now. I know what I'm doing. And you start to make decisions. I'm good enough to go fight for war. I want to vote. You start assuming that responsibility as an adult, but you're not an adult yet. And what happens all of a sudden, you turn 21. Oh, now I'm an officially an adult. We're in the 21st century. We're in the middle of Olean. We're in the middle of the cusp. And in the middle of all of that chaos where the adult recognizes that he's an adult. And that's the juncture we're at now. Humanity is now coming into its adulthood. That's why it's all critical mass. Not just Olean, but the whole thing. It all combines, it all comes together. And so the whole of history is a reflection of what we individually go through. So that old microcosm, macrocosm thing, it works on so many different levels, but even in a cultural level. Meanwhile, you have the same thing happening in the cultures to the east, which is still, like I said, those religions are what they are because they are still within the subconscious. They never left the garden. So in Hinduism, you have this multiplicity of gods, but it's very sophisticated. They understand. They have a one God concept too. They understood that. And all of the different gods are not because they have multiple gods. They're all different aspects of the different moods which become manifest as a particular total symbolic element, which is typical of the way the subconscious works. Look at your dreams. The language of dreams is the language of the subconscious. We just don't know how to interpret them. And that's what those religions have done. They've interpreted it and they've abstracted it. And they went real sophisticated by simplifying it into the basic duality in the concepts of the yin and yang in the Tao Te Ching, in Taoism. And so eventually what you're seeing the awakening, that awakening process that began here is eventually going to engulf the entire planet. And part of that process is being, when we're talking about technology here again, is part of the thing that's going to help to activate that is the internet. But not until the other basic ideas or conflicts have been resolved. Once those people start getting that and start fusing that, and you're seeing that synthesis between the East and the West happening now. It's going on now as we're talking. And so these things are all in motion. All of these energies are in motion. They're all moving. And what's happening is the planet is moving towards planetary consciousness, where our religion is going to be remodified somehow. And that's what a second coming is really all about. It's a redefining and a synthesis, and part of it is a recognition that, the same God that you may worship in Christianity or Judaism or Islam is the same God that all the other religions are worshiping too. That they're just different manifestations. They're all on that medicine wheel. They all have a different aspect and different perception, only based upon the nature of the location and the development of the culture. Once that dissemination of ideas and information takes place, where people start to recognize the commonality of it, that's when you're going to start seeing a real synthesis of all the cultures and all the people and a fusion of the races. And that's where technology comes in. That's where it can aid it. But that's not what they want. What they want is control. And that's the war word.
That's what we're vying for right now, right?
Yeah. That's what we're struggling for, is a freedom of that. So freedom for that. Anyway, that's my analysis in a nutshell.
So, did you have a question that you wanted to ask?
No.
Okay. So at age 70, is there urgency? Do you feel urgency in in the creative process and the work that you're doing now? Or is it the same as it always has been?
The only urgency is damn it, I'm 70. It's like.
Let me ask you this. Do you feel 70?
Not here, not inside.
Yeah. Mentally.
Physically.
That's where you see it, right?
Yeah. It's like I said to Arlette, I says, I have been on this stuff for over 50 years. I mean, it actually, way even before that, I didn't know it because I was a little kid and I was going back to this thing of Sleeper's Dilemma, where this idea comes from. In alchemy, they say there are people who are initiated. And an initiation doesn't necessarily take place in a formal way. The cosmos can initiate you for whatever reasons. And you're asking about why am I compelled to do or say these things that I do. I had this original concept of this idea when I was 8 years old. I was 8.5. I went in for a tonsillectomy. They wrapped a towel around your mouth and then they would pour ether in it and it would knock you out. They made you count backwards from 100. During the time that I was counting, I saw this image. I saw a man inside of a stone maze. He was naked. He had a big sickle, and he was cutting it. He wasn't wearing the mask. I added that. But he was cutting it, and he would fall back and disappear, and he'd get up like he was going to escape. But before he could escape, it would grow back up again. That's why I said it was like his tomb. I never forgot the image, and I did the first one in the early 70s. Then I did this one in 87. But that tells me that these energies were already at play in my head. And it also tells me, and what I've come to the conclusion of, is that maybe it's because of my Indian ancestry, my indigenous blood, whatever. If we lived in a tribal culture, I would be the kid that the village would say, because I started having convulsions when I was 8. Right at the time I had this, I saw this vision. I saw this in the operation, because I don't call that a vision, that I would have been the kid they would have taken to the medicine man and saying, make him your apprentice. This kid, there's something with him. And I would have been trained by somebody who knew these things as to what was happening to me and why. So I've had to sort all this out on my own. So I was always questing, even during the 60s when everybody was getting stoned and being psychedelic. The only reason I ever took psychedelics is because I wanted the answers to my questions. I didn't care about getting stoned. I never liked the partying. I never liked the whole, I participated in a lot of it, so I was stupid. The very first time I ever did acid, my experience was we were all high and all goofy and playing around. And then we went outside. And the first thing I noticed was that all the grass, I had x-ray vision and I could see the blood traveling through all the grass and the trees and everything. And everything was pulsating with these blood red veins and stuff. And I'm looking at everything and I'm going, wow, everything's alive. And then I heard a voice and I looked around and the only thing I could see was this tree. There was this cottonwood tree behind me. And I looked at it and I says, and I just goofy said, oh, is that you? And the tree chastised me. The tree gave me a lecture about how human beings were assholes because we thought we were the crown of creation, that we destroyed everything, and that everything in nature was singing to God and was worshiping God at all times, and it was God aware, and we weren't, and we were stupid. And because of our disconnect, we were stupid, and they hated us. You guys are killers. You destroy everything. And then he said this, which I thought was interesting. He said, but your ancestors were pretty good. And I said, my ancestors? He said, yeah. He said, before they took an animal or something, they always thanked him and they always asked his permission. He's referring to the Indians used to do that. That everything in nature, we're all doing what they were supposed to be doing. What we call instinct, they were calling God consciousness. They were saying no, and that hum, and when you hear the crickets making their cricket noise, they're singing, they're praising God. They're all doing that, and everything that you hear, and the way the wind blows, all of that stuff. He says it's alive, it's aware, but you guys, you're just a bunch of jerks. Tree had an attitude. He was pissed because he knew that his death would come with somebody killing him. Somebody was going to cut him down because trees don't die. Something has to kill them. And he had an attitude. So I was 17 years old. So right from the onset, I was sitting in a corner having visions and having these different things. And I think it's because, in a sense, for whatever reason, I don't know, there's a whole number of things, my doors were open. And I don't know why. And the only thing I can account for it is going back to those dreams that I told you about. Because those dreams implied that this was like, is that a dream or is that a memory? Was I remembering something, and is that why it made me so happy? And if it was a memory, that means that everything I was going through was part of what I was told was going to happen. And either I accept that or I go see a doctor, because what I was going through to me was far more interesting and more real. And the difference about being 70, where this plays into that, is at 70 now I don't care. I can say these things to you, whereas 20 years ago I wouldn't have said a lot of this stuff. I would have talked around it. I would have given you lighter stuff. I would have talked about maybe the visions and stuff like that and then laughed it off. Nor would I have assumed that I have any authority or any right to say what I'm saying, Now it's like, look, this is what my experience has been. This is who I am. And if I'm making a fool out of myself, which I've painted plenty of times, and that's where I've seen myself as a fool, it's okay. Because, I dug this hole. And I accept it. And, and that's the fact that you came and you asked me, to do this. I said, okay, well, here it goes. They keep asking me. I'm not looking for it.
Right. I sought you out specifically.
Yeah. So, and that's what keeps happening. That's, like when they asked me to talk at the art museum, I said, my first inclination to go there and say, I've been waiting 50 years to talk to you guys, and now I don't give a damn. So, catch you later. That's what I'd like to do. Just sort of like, it's too late. I don't care anymore. It's okay. I'm content. I remember once Ramon said something interesting to me. We were working in the studio, and he was giving me some lessons, and I said, "Gee, Ray, I'm having this real problem." And he says, "What?" And I says, "Well, I go to the house and I remember everything you tell me and what you show me, and I start to do a piece and I start working it, and all of a sudden I start drifting off, and all of a sudden I start meta-realizing it. I start doing this, I start doing that, and all of a sudden it becomes a whole other thing, and I'm going off on producing some sort of meta-real piece." And he looks at me and he gives me this dirty look and he goes, "What are you telling me? Are you trying to tell me you're one of the great artists?" And I looked at it, I got confused. I go, "No, I'm not trying to say that. Well, why would you say that?" He says, Because that's what the great artists do. The great artists are the ones that are compelled. You're telling me that you're compelled. You can't, in other words, you can't help what you do. You just have to do it. And, I didn't know what to say because that's what I was saying. That although I would try to gravitate to doing other things to make myself more palatable for a common audience. Because they used to say to me, well, paint one for yourself and one for them. And that's what I tried to do, a nice traditional pretty piece that I could sell and a metareal piece for me. But it just never worked. It just constantly always, like I said, no matter what I was starting on, it would always gravitate to something else. And I didn't know what to say because, he and I were, like I said, we're really good friends. We still are good friends. We're still really close. And in his heart, he knows that's what I was saying. But he played his part too. It's like he played the mentor and basically he went to Santa Fe with me. He took me to Santa Fe and he took me to galleries to introduce me because he thought he was gonna be my discoverer, that he was going to be the one who introduced me to the world. Although he was the hottest artist in Santa Fe at that time. He was the number one selling artist in Santa Fe. He was known all over town. Everywhere we went, they all knew him, treated him like a king. In fact, I always call him the prince. And yet they wouldn't even look at my work. They wouldn't do the slides or anything. And before it was over, he was furious. The last gallery we were in, he was yelling at the owner. And he was screaming at him. And the last thing he said, he says, if Picasso came in here, you wouldn't know you wouldn't know what good art is. Even if Picasso came in here, you wouldn't recognize him. And he stormed out. And I felt so bad for Ray because he thought he had accomplished something. And in the end, I said, look, you're just still Mexican, man. You just, the only reason you're hot is because you make money for them. And I says, but in terms of having any influence, where somebody's going to listen to you and pay attention to what, your opinion is.
So even at that moment, as hot as he was in Santa Fe, he was still being discriminated against for the color of his skin.
And that's what infuriated him. That's what infuriated him.
Sure. He hadn't experienced that probably in a while, right?
And I felt bad because I was a source of that embarrassment. I was all like, I was the innocent. I really was. I was really
right. You're just going.
I was going through my Woody Allen, phase where I was just kind of stupid, wandering around, following people that knew more than I did, and he did. I mean, one of the things that happened when we were there is, he says, I want you to go into that room and wander around and just listen to those people, just eavesdrop on them. And he says, and learn about who they are, what they are. I said, okay. So I wandered around with my little drink and I would stand next to guys or stand next to women, just eavesdropping. And which I don't like to do, which I don't do normally. And I freaked out because I didn't hear one single conversation about art. No conversations about the quality of art or who was the thing or who they liked or about art movements or nothing. All the men talked about were business deals, making money. And all the women talked about is who was a whore and who was getting their clothes and who was buying this and who was doing. It was all gossip. It was all gossip with the women and all money with the men. And I was like, wow, this is like a movie. This is like, these people aren't real people. They're just whores, And
I think
that was a real learning.
Frank Zappa called them plastic people, right?
Yeah. And that's nice. That's a nice thing. You get a little harsher than that.
He's putting a positive spin on it.
Yeah. But like I said, I'm at this point, what I'm interested in is whatever time I want to do my definitive work. I want to do, and I don't care whether people see it or not. I don't care if I ever do another show. I really don't. Because, when we get done, I'll show you some of the new pieces I'm working on. And I really like a lot of these. And the ones that I have in mind that I haven't even started yet, that I'm preparing canvases for, are just, And it's funny because for every idea I come up with, I get 3 spinoffs. And like I said, I don't care if anybody ever sees them or not. I'll just pile them up because that's what I'm doing right now. I'm wrapping them in plastic to help preserve them and stuff like that. And my sons will. I've talked a lot with Joshua. Arlette doesn't really have a clue as to what to do with it, but Joshua works. My son is a graphic artist, and he works for Stars right now. He does design work for their posters and stuff, and he knows a lot about business and computers and all that sort of stuff. And we've talked a lot about, because I told him, I said, all this is going to be yours and Paul's when I'm gone. And he says he knows what to do, and he knows he doesn't really want to sell it. What he wants to do is he wants to print it and wants to be able to put it out there in a way that he can still keep the work, because he wants to make a museum. But I don't really care what they do as long as it benefits them. And that's the only materialistic view I have. My family went through a lot for my vision. I mean, I used to say, oh, my boys never got to see Disneyland. That's really stupid, but that's just an example of what I mean, is that my kids never got to participate in things that a lot of other children get to do. Mm-hmm. They just, because we can never afford it or whatever. And so I was so preoccupied with working all the time, which now I kind of regret. On one hand, I don't. On the other hand, I do, because I lost a lot of time with them as children, as little kids. Although they all treat me well. They all. I've never had a fight with my daughter. I had one fight with my daughter. Tana's wonderful. She's a pearl. She's smart. She's an extraordinary woman. One day we got into a big old fight. And she got all pissed off. She drove away all pissed off. And I thought, gee, what just happened? And then she comes back 15, 20 minutes later. And she says, I'm sorry. I did that on purpose. And I said, what? What just happened? She said, well, we've never had a fight. And I just got tired of this idea. We've never had a fight. So I thought we should have at least one fight. Everybody fights in families. You don't, and she was already an adult woman and stuff. And we've never had a fight. Same with, Joshua or Paul. Paul's a little ornery, but it's just an affectation. They've never been disrespectful or abusive, or my grandchildren. Uh-huh. My grandchildren and my children all treat me with such respect. And the common thing they all come to me and say, in terms of lieu of my guilt that I have about, not being around as much because of the painting and stuff, they all come and say, you're our model for the idea of integrity. And that's,
that's a really high compliment.
And I never asked for it either. I mean, it's just like out of the blue. And all of them at one point or another said, when I think of integrity, I think of you.
It's the way you were with them. It's the old adage, actions speak louder than words, right? So
yeah, I still have a lot of guilt, though. Well, but that's okay.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I think they're all grown now, so whatever they felt, if they felt anything as children, as adults, they realized that was your path.
Yeah.
And you had to follow your path.
And one of the things that I try to do with all of them is to give them their path.
Right.
Not give it to them, but basically let them choose. Let them
be who they are.
Be who they are. And because I've never interfered with my daughter's life. She's going to be 50 here pretty soon.
Is she really?
Yeah, and Josh and Paul's just turned in his, I think, 30, and Joshua's going to be 30 here pretty soon. And they're their own people, and I've never tried to push them or make them into anything or criticize them. I've just been here to support whatever it is that they need, whatever they do, whatever. My son went through some bad things, and he expected me to give him, a tongue lashing for some of the things, and I didn't. And instead, we had extensive conversations, which he responded to with such positive energy, and pulled himself out of it.
He took it to heart and did what he thought he needed to do.
So like I said, you really learn to appreciate your children, but.
You make that realization that family really is important.
Yeah.
And like you said, you don't really care. You care about producing the work. You don't care after the fact. You would just hope that your children could benefit from.
Yeah. Whatever they can do with it, whatever they can get out of it is
And
fine.
yeah.
And that's that.